Hey everyone, welcome to Quick Reviews. Today I'm going to talk about Kingdom Hearts 3. I thought it would be a great first review since I've waited more than a decade for this game to actually come out, but that wasn't the case unfortunately. The game was incredibly short, the game was way too easy, and it was just an overall disappointment. In terms of a score, though, Kingdom Hearts 3 gets a 5.7. There's a whole bunch of nostalgia at play here, but it just feels like it's spreading itself incredibly thin and didn't really know what to focus on as a game. With that said, though, if you're a fan of the series, you've probably already played through the game, or you're picking it up regardless. But if you're considering introducing yourself to the series at this point in time, I honestly think this is possibly the worst place to start. So, with all that said, let's dive a little bit deeper into Kingdom Hearts 3 and see what the game has to offer. Let's start by taking a look at Kingdom Hearts 3's only redeeming quality, the gameplay. There are three major points I'd like to group the gameplay into, mainly combat, Gummi Missions, and the overwhelming number of minigames. Combat in Kingdom Hearts 3 doesn't differ from previous installments. Basically, swing your Keyblade around, cast some magic, generally have a good time. There are, however, a large number of attacks you can trigger in combat, from team attacks to slightly more impactful magic, form changes for your Keyblades, and a couple of Disney rides. The most unfortunate part of combat seems to be the simplicity. Most fights, including bosses, can easily be completed by running around in circles, waiting for these particular cues. Sometimes, though, an enemy will be highlighted with a green circle. Hitting these enemies triggers a ride command. From there, you go into a ride sequence, where you take minimal control over a minigame that damages surrounding enemies. At first, these are colorful, fun, and honestly, quite interesting. However, by the time you're halfway through the game, they're monotonous and generally easier to avoid and skip. If you're in a difficult battle though, which there really are not that many of, they can act as a quick route to victory or, a safe space to do a little extra damage. The biggest problem though is that they take up so much time. It's often more beneficial to just flail your Keyblade around, and that'll get you through a fight much quicker than these rides. Finally, the single most broken trigger in the game is Rage Mode. When you get low on health, Rage Mode triggers from time to time, and when that happens, you're effectively invincible as long as you spam the attack button. From there, even the tougher bosses just fall over and die. Without spoiling anything, this strategy also seems to render the final boss fight a complete joke. Moving on to the Gummi Missions. These are probably the most enjoyable part of the game. There is a lot going on in what's become a much more open Gummi exploration mode. The world is just very open and you get to explore it. It's pretty well put together. There are three major areas accessible in the game's progress, and each one has a lot to explore. There's some mini fights that you can approach to largely gain experience and a few items, but they're not particularly entertaining and they're definitely not a challenge. The main draw, for me at the very least, was the boss fights. The Gummi world introduces quite a few bosses tucked away that are at least somewhat challenging. For the most part though, you can just fly around in a circle while firing and defeat almost any boss, but it still manages to be enjoyable. I think we're noticing a little bit of a theme here. In Kingdom Hearts 3, you pretty much can achieve anything by running around in circles. Finally, let's take a quick look at the minigames. Each world seems to have at least one minigame associated with it. The Toy Story world, for example, lets you hop in a toy robot and shoot at enemies. This is pretty fun. The Pirates of the Caribbean world has Sora captaining a ship, and a few worlds leverage Goofy's shield as a means of transportation. From my perspective, Captain Sora on a pirate ship is probably the most entertaining minigame that sort of exists in this game. These games largely seem tacked onto each area that they're available in, though, and really offer no reward outside of potential achievements. There may have been one or two secrets tucked away that I never got to, but the pure monotony associated with these tasks just seems to render any potential reward really useless when you can complete the game simply without them. Goofy's shield in particular seems to be the most poorly implemented of the bunch. Turning either works too well or it doesn't work at all, so you either find yourself running into a wall or careening off in a direction you do not want to go in. You can also effectively summon characters in combat that help you in a variety of different ways. To be honest, combat was simple enough already that I didn't fully explore this system. It seemed more like a combat time sink than an actual enjoyable experience or effective means of dealing with your enemies. The summons are quite flashy though, and quite visually appealing, so if you want to run through that and just take a look at them, it's pretty fun. Overall, when you get to enjoy combat, it's fun, but combat doesn't seem to make up the majority of the game. You're riddled with cutscenes, minigames, and a lot of aimless exploration that really just doesn't let you enjoy the beautiful combat system that they've put together. Let's take a brief look at the story in Kingdom Hearts 3. Brief because we're going to avoid spoilers, and the first 24 hours of the game contribute absolutely nothing to how the eventual end of the game plays out. Kingdom Hearts 3 has you start by running around to various Disney worlds that pop up on your Gummi map in pairs. You jump into the worlds, explore a story related to the movie, fight a boss, and then move on to the next world. Initially, it felt like a larger story was being built up, that the worlds we explored would serve some sort of purpose to how the endgame actually played out. That wasn't the case. You eventually hit a point where the story just completely changes, and then after what felt like hours of cutscenes, the game was over, and nothing we did and no one we met seemed to have any impact. I was actually sitting in front of the game for a good 2 to 3 hours asking myself, is this the end of the game? It can't be the end of the game, but it feels like the end of the game. Is it the end of the game? I don't know. In past Kingdom Hearts games, exploring the worlds had a purpose. Whether you were saving princesses or discovering clues to a grander plot, literally nothing, absolutely nothing, impacts the greater plot other than a short scene after you finish a world, where Sora checks in on what everyone else is doing. It's incredibly disappointing, and it really feels like Sora, the main character in Kingdom Hearts 3, and in Kingdom Hearts in general, contributed absolutely nothing to the plot of Kingdom Hearts 3. Finally, let's jump into design. For Kingdom Hearts 3, I'm splitting design into two main sections: the actual graphics and visual appeal of the game, and the general world design. How do the worlds feel in play? Kingdom Hearts 3 is a huge step up visually from all of the previous games. All of the character models are a lot more detailed, the worlds are much larger, and the design style for each world really fits the theme. I feel like they did an amazing job making each world feel like we were playing through the movies and just injecting Sora into those worlds. Unfortunately, there are still some problems. Some models, when you zoom in a little, wind up looking a little broken. While the visuals are a step up from other Kingdom Hearts games, they just don't feel like they have the degree of detail that exists in most other modern games from this generation. Other games have taken cartoony styles and done much more with them. Beyond that, animations often clip through terrain, leaving you looking at half of an attack while the camera flies off to some strange angle that doesn't actually let you enjoy the aesthetic pleasure of the over-the-top finishers and attacks in this game. In fact, I found more often than not, whenever you execute any form changes, or even some rides, the camera would just fly off and make it incredibly difficult for you to figure out what was going on around you. There were also some cutscenes where the camera clipped to the floor and you'd be left looking at the empty undercarriage of the world you were in. This just seemed like an oversight. You'd think someone would have noticed that some of the cutscenes weren't quite properly animated. So what about the actual world design? Every world feels radically different. Some of the worlds feel truly amazing. For example, Tangled and Pirates of the Caribbean were probably my two favorites. And then some of the worlds just felt monotonous and boring. Looking at you, Toy Story and Big Hero 6. Toy Story was probably the world I was looking forward to the most when I heard about what would be included in Kingdom Hearts 3. You start off and things are looking pretty good. Andy's room. This looks awesome, and it's so Toy Story. Then you go outside. The street looks amazing, and they did a really good job. But then you get to the toy store. This is where you will listen to You've Got a Friend in Me on loop for the next 2 to 3 hours of your life, maybe more. The toy store is the only part of the Toy Story world you'll see from this point forward. The entire world is this toy store. This empty, sparse feeling toy store where there are multiple dead ends, very little to actually do, and then you just run back and forth between different stores within the store for a while. Big Hero 6 has a very similar problem. The entire world was basically boiled down to a single large area that you could explore, but for the most part, it felt like there was nothing going on in the world except for when you have a story-driven goal guiding you through specific sections of the single large map you're thrown into. Conversely, Pirates of the Caribbean is a single large map, but it felt like you had a lot more direction while you sailed around. Every island has something going on in it, and there's some sort of reward that was satisfying to discover. Everything else felt relatively linear in world design. Frozen, you're running down a straight path. That's it. Tangled, you're running down a straight path. It's much more visually appealing, but it's a straight path. Olympus? Yep, it's mostly a straight path. Monsters Inc? It's actually the straightest line. I actually don't have a problem with linearity, though. I actually prefer these worlds over the large and empty worlds. They're still generally enjoyable and were fun to play with. However, if you enjoy exploring worlds, I can't imagine you'd enjoy anything about Kingdom Hearts 3 world design. Before closing this out, I'm going to quickly talk about the Gummi Phone, and a variety of other small mini-games here and there. The Gummi Phone offers some super retro-style mini-games to play. That's it. That's all it does. It offers them to you. There's no reason to play them. There's no reward. You also save Little Chef pretty early on in your journey, and that will open up the restaurant minigame where you can cook and make meals. At no point did I eat any meals. There wasn't really a reason to. The stat boosts were minimal, and I honestly forgot this mechanic existed for the better part of the game. Then, there's synthesis. This mechanic has existed in other Kingdom Hearts games, and in other games, it generally felt like you could search and discover crafting material that could put you ahead on the equipment curve. Here, it didn't feel like that was the case. It largely seems to exist for a player that wants to make everything for the sake of saying that they did. Finding what you need to craft anything worth crafting isn't worth the time. It's that easy. And if you instead spend that time progressing forwards through the story and the game, you'll pretty much wind up with exactly the same gear anyways, with much less time invested finding obscure items on the side. Last but not least, postgame. What happens when you beat the game? Not really anything. There are a few difficult fights that exist in each world post-game and a super boss. All in all, post-game content was the first step I took in Kingdom Hearts 3, and it took me about 10 hours to find everything I wanted to find in beat post-game. That's on top of the 30 hours it took me to beat the game initially. With that said though, there are definitely some things post-game that are fun to do, and it can also be somewhat enjoyable to go back and clean up the Gummi Missions that you might have skipped, fight some of the extra Gummi bosses that you might have skipped. But in terms of combat-related post-game material, there's pretty much nothing. One other minor post-game bit that pops up is an extended menu at Little Chef's restaurant. You'll have to go and explore to find some pretty obscure ingredients that only pop up in the post-game. From there, you'll be able to craft and make some more meals that literally serve no purpose because you've already beaten the game. Kingdom Hearts 3 was a gargantuan disappointment. If Kingdom Hearts 3 had chosen to focus on something primarily like the combat system, and actually allowed you to enjoy that, it would have probably been a much better game. But mixing in a million minigames that generally have no reward and are poorly put together to begin with really takes you out of the game. It doesn't bring you in. It isn't enjoyable. Beyond all of that, though, I think the greatest disappointment in Kingdom Hearts was the story. Nothing I wanted to have concluded coming into Kingdom Hearts 3 felt like it was concluded. Hell, Kingdom Hearts 3 didn't even conclude its own storylines in any reasonable way. It almost feels like they created a chain of stories and events that could have impacted the game, and then they just decided to drop them. out of nowhere. And as a result, Kingdom Hearts 3 just didn't live up to my expectations in any way, shape, or form. Anyways, that's it for the review. If you disagree with some of the things that I've said about Kingdom Hearts 3, feel free to leave a comment and let me know what you think. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.